Okay, looks like we're live. Hey everybody, how's it going? This has been a thing I had planned for a while. Some independent quote-unquote research on the opening stinger for Dawn of the Dead, 1978. Okay, looks like we're live. Many of you are watching this. You know what a classic it is, and this has been a how many amazing I had planned for a while. Came together to make this independent landmark movie, and quote-unquote research on one of my favorite parts was the actually opening stinger for Dawn of the Dead. The opening stinger that sets the tone for the movie. So I wanted to share that with you guys as I discovered some stuff playing around with some audio files, listened to soundtrack recordings from the movie that have been released over the years. And what I wanted to quickly do is go over kind of a little bit of the background on this thing. So, as you know, George Romero was widely known for his writing and directing, but less so for his editing, specifically audio editing. I mean, people don't give him enough credit for some of the really clever stuff he's done in movies like Martin, as well as Dawn, and other stuff where he's taken elements from library music, composers. In the case of Martin, it was Donald Rubinstein. In the case of Dawn, it was Goblin score that came with the help of Dario Argento. And anyway, so if you're a credits junkie like I am, and you get into all the juicy trivia that you learn over the years from various people and interviews and commentaries and such, you quickly learn how amazing George was at editing in general, like I said, and with audio. So the U.S. theatrical cut of Dawn is a perfect example of the creativity and talent to take all these different audio elements and create a very memorable opening stinger to kick off the piece. And basically starts it off with a real bang, like, wow, I've set the tone for this movie. The Fran wakes up from her dream, and then the news stations in chaos, the TV stations in chaos, and then other Goblin music kicks in after the stinger. But it's really interesting stuff. So it's funny because John Carpenter is given a lot of credit and is pretty well known for making stingers in movies like Halloween and Halloween 2 using synthesizers because that's his bag. He's a synthesist and a musician. Also working with Alan Howarth. But George was able to create stuff like the Dawn Stinger by using components he was provided from the musical score elements, library music. He had researched heavily to find what he liked and what to chop up and stuff. And as you'll hear, Goblin score elements that were even slightly different than what we're provided with, either in the original Dawn score, which had all the Goblin cuts. Probably half of them weren't even used in the U.S. theatrical cut, but used heavily in the European cut from Argento. Um, Even the 20th anniversary had some extra cuts in there that I'm going to go over in a bit that were pretty cool and gave me some more insight into how he constructed this opening stinger and other elements of the movie as well that are beyond the scope of this little video. But clearly, as you'll hear, he had access to even more cuts, things with simplified layers, not so much complex layering of some of the kind of zombie noises they created with effects, and layered synthesizer flourishes and other kinds of interesting little bits. So I'm going to go through all that stuff. But just to give you a quick breakdown here of why I got into this and how I found this, and it's basically a simple breakdown of the layers he used to make the stinger. And as a quick disclaimer, some of these elements are not exact, like I said, because I don't have access to the individual bits he used. Because clearly some of these have layers in them that were not there in the stinger that he created. So I'm having to work with what I have from the soundtracks that were released. The original, the 20th anniversary, also titled Zombie with an I, and also the library music that was released on the Trunk Records recording called Unreleased Incidental Music from George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And I'll show you the cover of that in a little bit. Actually, you can see it in the bottom left corner. Sorry, I have too many screens open here. I'm looking at different stuff. So that's where the first element of the score came from. There's a track called Cosmogony Part 1. And I forgot to look up the composer, but if you have the CD or look it up online, you'll see the composer's name in there. Anyway, so that is the stuff I've based these different extrapolations and configurations to create the stinger. So hope this is enjoyable to everybody. So as you can see, I've shared a few things here. So there's the artwork here for the Dawn of the Dead library music, incidental music, stuff like that. Mostly from the DeWolfe library, but I believe there's some other elements as well in there. And so just to kick everything off really quickly, I'm going to play the opening stinger from the movie as it was shown in the actual movie. So here we go. Make sure this is not too loud.
You all right? Shit's really hitting the fan.
Okay, so there you go. You can hear the last element actually trails off, and then you get to some dialogue with people screaming in the background and stuff, as well as the her scream and the character come up to her and asking if she's all right. So that is what we're starting with here. And like I said, as I was recently listening to various soundtrack albums that have been released, uh, I just heard elements that clicked, and I go, "Wow, interesting." So we actually have access to some of the stuff he used to build that stinger. So again, I have an audio example here playing in VLC on the side. I'm not going to keep playing the video clip because in case that was too much already and I get either copyright claimed or maybe even a copyright strike, I'm just going to play the audio without the video. So hopefully that little bit won't take the video down. So what I want to show now is um, the elements here that make up the stinger. So I have Audacity open here, multi-track, and I can basically, they're all laid out. This is a really rough layout. It's not precise. I didn't sit here and fine tune it 100%, but you'll get the idea because it's really more of a explanation of how it works, not a perfect copy, as I said in the intro. But as you see the notes next to each track, I'll just briefly talk about each one before I play them. So the first one is the Cosmogony Part 1, and this is the album it came from, unreleased incidental music from George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. That's the album art, the yellow graphic on the left side there for the front cover. And I got this back in, I don't know, 2002 or something like it when it was released. And it was one of those like a godsend. You're like, wow, this is like the way you get the gonk and a bunch of other famous bits from the movie, as well as music from various other parts throughout because George loved the library music. It's also used heavily in Creepshow and way, way back in Night of the Living Dead. So he always was a big fan of library music, and then having composers also contribute, and he kind of mixed and matched. So this is a really nice example of that. So first track is Cosmogony Part 1. So I'm going to play that real quick, and you can hear that. So make sure everything else is muted here, so I don't ruin my little example. Okay, so now we just have Cosmogony Part 1 on the top. So here we go. And I have it basically tapering off right after she screams and the music fades out and you start getting to the dialogue. So I did basically got some tapering done here, some fade in, fade out stuff. So stuff matches fairly well. So here's element 1, the longest part that runs the entire length of that clip, Cosmogony Part 1. Now, you'll hear that little cymbal hit right before it starts to fade out in the original clip, if you listen very carefully. So that's where I decided the fade should happen. And again, it's not a perfect copy of the fade, but it gets close enough to get the point across. So that's element 1. Element 2, let's line up the notes here a little bit. Element 2 is from the 20th anniversary release, which now I'll switch to that graphic. That's what the cover of the 20th anniversary Dawn of the Dead score looks like. So it has a bunch of extra tracks that were not in the original. Um, I actually should have included a picture of that. I forgot to include it. But you guys have most likely seen it or own it. It's the classic Dawn of the Dead, you know, airport zombie, the Paul Musser zombie artwork with Dawn of the Dead title. And you flip it over, and that's got all the Goblin tracks. Like I said, about half were used on the North American or U.S. release. A whole bunch of them were not. But the 20th anniversary included all these like special variation versions. So, for example, part 2 is it's more than just a mellotron choir. And just real quickly, if you guys don't know what a mellotron is, in the 60s and 70s, we didn't have sampling technology like which makes CD-ROMs possible, audio CDs possible, and samplers like a Fairlight or even an old Casio SK1 simple sampler that people played with in the 80s, or your phone or anything that's digital sampling that you can record drum sounds, animal sounds, whatever, play them back, make music out of them, whatever you want to do with them. They didn't have the technology back in the 60s and 70s. Everything was tape based for the most part, and or vinyl based, but vinyl was not so easy to wrangle for certain people, and tape was very malleable. You could easily splice it with a splice block, like the Musette Concrete people did back and way back in the Stockhausen days. But the you pretty much had this tape loop system where it looks like a keyboard, but every key is playing a tape loop over an individual playback head with basically, and it's not technically a loop because it would end at around 8 seconds for the most part. I think there's some differences in different models. It was originally a thing called the Chamberlain, and there's a whole long story about how the Mellotron got made. They kind of stole the idea from the Chamberlain guys and made the Mellotron in the UK. Anyway, it's a real classic thing. It's to give an example. It was used by anyone who wanted to use strings, choir, organs, complex rhythm arrangements where they didn't have those instruments or the techniques, like some Caribbean beat or some conga stuff or whatever it might be, even sound effects. And so, famously used by Moody Blues, the Beatles, Strawberry Fields is a famous bit, the opening bit that sounds like a flute. They're playing that on a mellotron. You got the Beatles, King Crimson, Rolling Stones used it for a lot of stuff. Genesis, yes, and of course Tangerine Dream used it on a ton of stuff in the 70s. and even later into the 80s and 90s and such. OMD, Oasis, Radiohead. It has legs. People love the Mellotron sound. The guys who can afford to maintain it and also cart it around. It's a big, heavy machine. You can imagine with all the moving parts and the different tapes you have to swap out every time you want to switch to a different set of banks. You'd have to do that. So there are all kinds of digital versions of it online now. You can even get it for the iPad. You can get it on your Mac and PC, even on your phone. So I mean, there you can use Mellotron stuff everywhere. But back then, this is what they had to do. Stuff that was impossible, like a pipe organ you take on tour, or choir sounds, strings, all that kind of stuff. Like I said. Anyway, so Goblin was no stranger to all that kind of stuff. You heard their stuff is very um, it's prog rock, but they also had elements of orchestral bits and organ sounds, and so they use the mellotron a lot. So as you can see in the thing here, it says Mellotron Choir Plus because it's really like a synth sound layered with the Mellotron Choir. It's not just a pure Mellotron Choir, and there are even many versions of Mellotron Choir out there. So to nail down the exact one, I didn't sit there and painstakingly figure it out, but going through the recordings on the actual thing on the 20th anniversary, this one right here, the Dawn of the Dead soundtrack with the Italian name, the Dawn of the Living Dead, or L'Alba del Morti Viventi intro alternate take has this. When you find the specific spot, you get this sound. Now you can hear there's a low synthesizer sound layered with that choir. It's not just the choir sound. Um, and that's actually used a few times in the movie as a stinger, just not as elaborate as the opening stinger. Um, so it's a really nice sound. I love Mellotron. Sounds a lot. So that is the second element. Third element is these zombie vocals. Kind of stuff. It's basically the guys, if you listen carefully, they're just running their vocals through some time-based effect, like a flanger pitch shift, flanger heavy chorus effect, most likely a flanger on extreme feedback settings with some delay in there and stuff. Could be a tape-based delay. It could be an early digital delay. Not exactly sure, but the point is you hear these. There's more to it than just some guy screaming into a microphone, right? It's more elaborate than that, and it's just this otherworldly sound, which makes it extra creepy and perfect for the movie. So that is this one. Oh, sorry, before I mention the thing, that's the alternate take for this other track, which is at the margins of madness or edge of madness, depending how you translate it. Al margini della follia. Alternate take. Again, another alternate take. So if you didn't have the 20th anniversary album or CD collection, whatever, you didn't get these tracks. So again, that's how I stumbled across this stuff. So now we get the zombie vocal isolated. Check this out. Everything else is muted. Here we go. Now, unfortunately, like I said, we're not able to get a nice clean version of that without the synthesizer woo, and a little like bubbly synthesizer, fun stuff in the background there, where Simon Eddy's basically going crazy on the keyboards, or probably even a modular system. And so it's a cool layer, but it's not the clean one used in the Stinger. So clearly Romero had alternate takes beyond these alternate takes that were more isolated into layers. So you have that. That is part 3. And then finally, we end up with part 4. Quick footnote before I get to part 4, there's technically a part 5, which I put here as missing sound. There is clearly a drum cymbal layer on top of the guitar that I'm not going to play that I couldn't isolate. They could have just grabbed it from any take from any of their tracks, but you'd have to painstakingly go through all the tracks and listen for that specific drum cymbal layered sound. So I left that out because I can't get the exact one, and you hear it there, but the thing sounds pretty cool even without it. But so like I said, these are extrapolations on stuff. They're not perfect copies of everything, but these are definitely the elements used to make it. He just had, I said isolated versions to play it. So here's the guitar, and this is actually the track used. This is called Zeratazome or Shriek, or it's another name I think on one of the other album translations. And this is one used for the bikers entering the mall in the Dario Argento European cut. Um, Romero used more of the Goblin music that was already used in other parts of the movie, but he didn't choose to use this track. It actually works pretty well with the bikers coming in, but anyway, at the very end of the track, it's a very it's got some cool synthy riffs in it. It's got some driving guitars and lots of drums, much faster than most of the other pieces by Goblin in the tracks used by Romero. So it's a cool little track. But at the very, very end of the track, there is an isolated guitar hit. Now, I believe he may have pitched it a little bit, or again had an alternate take of some of the guitar hits. And also, if you layer the guitar, like I said, with this the drum and the cymbal, and get the mix better, it would sound more like the real one. But this is pretty close to what it sounds like with forgiving the pitch and such. So here's the guitar bit at the end. Okay, so now the fun part. We're going to turn on all the layers. That's a great thing about Audacity. You can multi-layer stuff and audition bits and stuff. And it's a free audio editor. So if you don't use Audacity, free for Mac and PC, probably even Linux. I don't use Linux that much, but this is one of the multi-track things you can do on Audacity. It's pretty clever. Takes a bit getting used to because most people pretty much play just with the one layer. But yeah, as you can see, multi-layer capability is quite nice. Kind of like you do in a video editor like Premiere with you multi-layered audio tracks. You can do it in here and not use video at all. It's really nice. So now I've turned them all on. They're all blue and they're not gray. And again, I've only got 4 elements. I said the possible 5th element is this drum cymbal layer on the guitar at the same time as the guitar. And who knows? He may have had some other sneaky ones in there that I didn't quite hear because of how they're cleverly layered in there. Like I said, he had a great ear for this stuff, even though he wasn't a musician. He's a writer, editor, filmmaker. He came up with these amazing collages of sound. So now we're going to play the full. And you'll hear I did an approximate mixing of the fade in, fade out, and when they drop in and stuff. So here you go. And as you heard in the movie, it's going to loop again, sorry. As you heard in the movie, and I'll play it here with my little VLC clip of it. The last sound that trails off is that Mellotron choir with the synth that's fading out right as she's screaming. And it continues to fade out a little bit more after she screams. And then the guy says, "You all right?" Shit's really hitting the fan. And then you start hearing the screaming of the guys in the studio. And then pretty soon it kicks into this other driving do 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 do, you know, Goblin track, which is really really cool. But I'm not playing that here. This is just the stinger. So here's the opening bit one more time, isolated audio.
You alright? Shit's really hitting the fan.
Because recall it doesn't last long, and people you're playing right back to back, so you can hear them together. All right. So that's kind of all I had planned for this quick little breakdown. Um, just one of those things that, George doesn't get the credit he's due for a lot of this stuff. People who are super fans like me and Alpha Romero and a bunch of other people, Lawrence DeVincent's and other people out there who um, obviously know way more about a lot of the stuff than I do. But being a music and audio nerd and all that kind of stuff, I'll gravitate to this stuff pretty easily. And it was fun little experiment to kind of it's like God, that sounds like the bit he used in that, and you listen to it over and over and over again, and pretty soon it gets in your head like, oh, I actually have a lot of the elements that he used to make this. But again, as you heard, not all totally clean. I don't have synth-free zombie noises, and I don't have possibly probably the right guitar at the end there, but it's close. Like the pitch is off a little bit, and it's possibly a little bit too fast. I think it's a little bit slower in the so with tape speeds and stuff, you could make some subtle changes that will sound quite different than changing it in digital format. So again, this is part of the artistry of the old guard, where they didn't have all these digital tools to play with, so they had to get very clever and creative with how to do stuff, just like the people did in the Musique Concrète days and radiophonic workshop people got with the BBC in the 60s, like all the old Doctor Who stuff. Very, very clever test equipment and tape splicing and tapes playing backward and forward at the same time and all kinds of really weird stuff to make things happen. So, again, George wasn't a musician, but he's in that camp for coming up with some really clever ways to layer audio. And I've loved that opening. That's why the European cut is just not my favorite at all, because yes, there's more Goblin music, which is great. Um, but George's use of library music and layering and certain kinds of edits and fades and stuff, really, really cool. Um, and Creepshow has a lot of that as well. There's John Harrison's score for Creepshow is excellent. Um, but he uses a lot of library music in there too. Mixes them together, separate elements sometimes, So it pays to go back to George's movies if you haven't, with this kind of mindset, and go listen to it. Don't just watch the movie and enjoy it. Go out and listen to it carefully and listen to the elements. And if you own the soundtracks, that gives you more time. You can listen to the car, at work, or whatever, and not just sit in front of the movie and just put your ear to it and not your eyes. And I think you'll find some nice little treasures in there. He was a very clever dude, and we all miss him big time. R.I.P. to George Romero. Um, so um, yeah, so that's kind of all I had to say for this one. I didn't want to make it too long because it wasn't that much content, but I think it's important to get this out there. And I've been promising some people I've been talking to lately that I was going to do this. So Hopefully the audio levels turned out okay. I did a pre-show thing just to make sure I didn't screw it up too badly, but you never know with a live stream. I'll have to go back and listen to it and see. But if it, if it's messed up, I'll do it again. But so far, I think it should be okay. I've been watching the levels here, but I was also clicking on different windows, so I'm not watching the VU meters constantly. So I think that will do it. So I haven't had a chance to. I'm not watching the chat for this one. I'm just trying to get the information out there and do it quickly. So if I missed anyone live chat, sorry about that. I always love going back and reading the live chat later, but I wanted to make sure I got this stuff out there without too many glitches and forgetting stuff because I want to make sure certain information definitely got out there and I didn't have to do a retake again unless I did the audio glitch or something. But thanks again for everyone who tuned in live. If you're here, if you're watching on the replay, please feel free to leave comments and questions and stuff. And I'll gladly do some follow-ups and stuff like this. I may end up doing something on Creepshow at some point, or maybe even Night of the Living Dead. Again, there's great library music in there. There was a talk at Living Dead Weekend that was phenomenal. In fact, I talked to um, the guys who were on the podium or on the dais at the time. Um, and they had some great information. One of the guys, I'm really bad with names sometimes. I forgot the guy's name. He's part of the Image 10 group, restoring Night of the Living Dead and doing some other stuff with them. And he knows the library music system inside and out for Night of the Living Dead, for Creepshow. In fact, he said that they may be coming out with a Creepshow set pretty soon, kind of like they did for the library music for Dawn of the Dead, which is pretty awesome. So you can actually have copies of the library music they use for that, which will be excellent. And then, of course, Night of the Living Dead soundtrack has been out for a long time. I have the old vinyl, and that had some really classic library music. And they talked about that in that same Creepshow lecture. It was basically Michael Gornick was talking about it because he also analyzed the music and picked music for Creepshow and stuff, as well as some other stuff he worked on. Um, and these little needle drops they call them. So back then you had to pay by needle drop because the albums came out as albums. They didn't come out as tapes, although he did have some reel-to-reel tapes there to choose from as well that they passed around the room. It was pretty cool to see that. So it's on my streams. If you go look at my, I think I've updated those by now. If not, I might still need to upload them to my channel. I'm been way behind on my uploads from Living Dead Weekend. There, I just shot hours and hours of footage. But that was really, really useful information. And it's funny when he was talking about Night of the Living Dead because the a lot of that music, if you're familiar with old sci-fi movies and stuff, like Teenagers from Outer Space, which is a classic mystery science theater thing that just it's one of those terrible, funny movies, but had a lot of these great music cues that were eventually used in Night of the Living Dead. So I didn't know it when I saw Night of the Living Dead, but now that I've memorized that music and then I go watch these other movies from older time periods or around the same time period, you start laughing. Go, oh, that's that clip from Night of the Living Dead where the guy did this. But in this silly sci-fi movie, they're using it for some other thing to kind of give the movie some gravitas. But you end up just kind of chuckling because it's often used better in movies like Night of the Living Dead. So that's another fun thing about learning this library music is it shows up all over the place because again, a lot of people couldn't afford musicians or just wanted a certain sound. They would browse at their leisure, pay for the needle drops, and they're done. Their movie is a lot more affordable than it would be if they hired an orchestra or a full-on composer with a studio and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm just yakking at this point, but yeah, all kinds of cool stuff with the soundtracks and the layers and the editing and library music and stuff. So I'll probably do some other stuff in the future about this, but this was kind of gnawing at me because I discovered this about 2 weeks ago, maybe less. I was like, God, I really got to put this out there before I forget, and maybe start a dialogue with people about other things like this, and do some other little shows, or even do a live stream. Um, I know Alfa Romero's been doing stuff with Paul on soundtracks and stuff. So I may talk to him about doing this as another episode, breaking down stuff. If I can prepare stuff in time and do it more of a live thing with Q&A and this and the chat and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see how that goes, but that might be a fun thing. But I really wanted to concentrate on this and get it out and not forget all the parts I meant to mention. So pretty sure I covered all the bases. But yeah, feel free to ask questions if you got any or comments or whatever. And again, if I missed the live chat, people, because I'm so busy concentrating on the content here, I apologize. And I will read the live chat and comment back in the comments. And always much appreciated when people watch and comment and spend their time because there's so many other options out there, and it's nice when people, um, you know, invest their time and their energy. So thanks again, everybody, and see you soon. And as George Romero is famous for saying, stay scared.